growing. And so I think in China, when you're talking about 1.3 billion people, you're not going to be able to very easily go back to what you were. You will continue to roll forward.
Tempo?
I think, one Olympic is not enough for China to change the human rights record. I think they should be given a few more. And then probably IOC can then go give it to Zimbabwe
Sophie, yes, from Amnesty.
Thanks, Jenny. In response to Simon's point about not being able to measure the human rights improvements, I mean, we'd be happy and have offered a lot to work with the IOC and the AOC in ways to measure those human rights improvements in China and around the world, and it's what we do. And unfortunately, we've seen a decline in human rights in direct relationship to the Games, abuses that Melinda spoke of and abuses that Michelle's mentioned. And if we're looking for KPIs, we can certainly provide those, and they're about the release of activists, and they're about the reduction of the use of the death penalty, and statistics and transparency, and the list continues, and we haven't seen any of those. And the lasting legacy and the beautiful images that Michelle's talked about and Tracy just mentioned, we're not seeing that positive legacy, and we're seeing, as you pointed out, the image of China that they want to give us, not the
Gentleman
truth.
up the back, yes.
Oh, wow. I think it's very good idea. If China can hold a very successful Olympic Games, and the Chinese people are very welcome, and we can host a lot of Olympic Games. But I don't think it's very balanced. And I have two questions. How many people of us have been to China?
I have.
And how long have you been staying in China?
I've been 20 years.
Okay. After Olympic Games, I think people will understand what true life in China and what Chinese people expect in the world, and what Chinese government and Chinese people do for the world and for the Olympic Games.
Okay, I think a lot of people want to respond to that. Would you like to respond first?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the problem is really, I grew up there, and the Chinese have a constitutional law, but the Chinese, every small government, big government, all authorities is above law. They don't follow the Chinese constitutional law. They all, whatever they want to do. That is the main problem.
Lisa?
In the lead up to the Moscow Games, the media were crazy, and quite a lot of the media saying that we should actually boycott the Games, in fact that we should have our passports taken off us if we even think about going to the Olympic Games. And there was outrage about what the Soviets were doing. Once we got to the Olympic Games, there was not one question about the politics of the Olympics leading up to that. And afterwards, if you go to the newspapers after those Olympic Games, not one follow-up story as to what was going on in Afghanistan and what the Soviets were doing. So I would think that if we want China to change, then it is up to the media and all of the people who are hosting these fantastic forums to continue to have forums like this, so people in Tibet and people in all the other provinces get to speak out. But I bet no one will continue this the discussion after the Olympics.
Michelle?
I think that's a really important point. I mean, China has certainly been under the scrutiny of the international media for a year now, and I, for one, hope that stops during the Olympics and it's really a focus on sport. But post the Olympics, the media can be fickle and attentions can wane, and I think it's really important that we remember everything that was in the media before in the lead up to the Games and focus on that again afterwards.
Mareko, what do you think? What do you hope will be the legacy of these Games?
I hope there'll be two legacies. The legacy of the athletes themselves, which will excite and inspire the world, and the capabilities of what people can achieve, and a new awareness. And hopefully we've all seen what's happened now, that we can look to the future and try and make a better world before we have another situation like this happening, and take the responsibility to educate ourselves and become more aware about everybody in the world and things that can be done to help.
Melinda, has the Olympics been a force for good in China from where you sit?
I think in some ways it has, and in other ways it's not been. I think the lasting legacy of the Games will not become clear yet. As a journalist residing in Beijing now, I actually think the post-Olympic period will be extremely important for clarifying what this legacy will be. Personally, I would hope that it would be a legacy of transparency. We've seen improvements in that regard, especially right after the earthquake in Sichuan. We've also seen some stunning tragedies in terms of transparency, like what happened in Tibet, which remains a mystery to the outside world even today. But the criticism of the opacity about what happened in Tibet, I think, could be a force for good in the longer term, in the medium term even, focusing people's attention on the need for transparency. I think it's possibly too ambitious to say, let's just reverse this human rights record in a very short period of time, but certainly the record on transparency shows some signs of promise.
What do you think, Paul?
I think we should be wary of putting too great a burden of expectation on the Olympics. The legacy of the Games ought to be that we speak candidly and temperately about these realities in China. We don't have to be angry and hostile towards China or even to the party, just honest about it. And if that comes out as the legacy of this Games, of the dialogue about them, we will have made progress.
Simon, how will you be measuring whether these Games are a success?
The sustainability of things like increase in sport and recreation, which is a legacy we haven't talked about here, which is very important to me, and I'm a great supporter of Amnesty International, but I think it's a little bit rich to say that there hasn't been a legacy, a positive legacy from the Olympic Games before the Olympic Games have been held. I think it's a little bit hard to say that. Let's look in 5 years and
well, who'll be looking in 5 years?
Well,
who'll be measuring what's happened?
I hope everybody, but and I think, and I suspect, with modern communications being the way they are, okay, not widespread in some parts of China, but throughout the world, I hope it'll be different now, because it's a whole new different world of communications now, and it's much harder to bottle things up and hide things than it was then.
Temper, what would you like to see be the legacy of these Games?
For me, as a Tibetan, one of the worst thing with the Olympics for, this year is the resentment that the Chinese Communist government has created, not just between the Tibetans and the Chinese in Tibet itself, but around the world. This strong resentment which will take generations and generations to heal. And I'm so glad that some of the Chinese who are here, and hopefully we can make the contact and continue to still become friends despite having the political difference. So I really hope that from this program, one of the best outcomes is to become friends with some of the Chinese people here tonight.
Yes?
I just want to say one thing, that as far as I see, there's no resentment between Chinese and our Tibetan friends, as that gentleman has raised, that ever created by the government. Yeah, we've been friends for decades, but well, there's only a few things that really made me unhappy when I was watching some video clips on the internet about the torch relay in other nations. For example, in France, people who are supporting the Tibetan independence were doing something really wrong, as far as I can understand. To the torch relay, which make me mad. And a part of that, I don't think anything will, bring up a resentment between us and, Tibetan people.
Nova, as an Olympian. And finally, Bob Brown, now that the Prime Minister is going to the Olympics, what do you want him to do when he gets there?
I'd like him, after the Olympics visit, to go to Tibet. And I'd like him to be helping the Tibetans. Well, the whole world is being invited to Beijing. If our Prime Minister can get an invitation for the Dalai Lama to go back to Tibet and be reunited with his 7 million Tibetans, I reckon the whole world will have a double celebration, both the Olympics and a fantastic event for everybody concerned.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us from Hobart, Bob Brown, and to you, Melinda Liu. Thank you very much for joining us from Beijing tonight, and thanks to everybody here in our studio audience as well. And that is Insight for this week, but you can keep talking online at sbs.com.au/insight. As I mentioned, we did invite the Prime Minister on tonight. He declined, and the Foreign Minister, Stephen Smith, was unavailable. Insight is repeated on Friday at 1:30, again on Monday at 3:30. Next week, are you ready for petrol at $2 a litre? Can the price be kept down, or should it be even higher to make us change our ways? That's next week. Till then, good night.